Welcome to Prose and Cons, a podcast by writers for writers, brought to you by Precipice Fiction. Precipice Fiction would like to acknowledge the people of the Eora and Durag nations as the original custodians and storytellers of the land this podcast was created on.
Okay, 1 second, just turning my phone off so it doesn't bloop. Okay, here we go. What if I told you that there was a secret code in storytelling, a set of themes and elements ordered in a specific way that recurs again and again throughout the history of human storytelling, across times, regions, and cultures? It sounds like something for a Dan Brown novel, but no, this is the very idea we're going to explore today. Today, we're going to crack the code, plumb the mystery, and explore the depths of the monomyth, aka the hero's journey.
Dun, dun, dun.
Perfect. But first, welcome to Pros and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast, the podcast for emerging writers by emerging writers, because sometimes we feel like pros and sometimes we feel like cons. I'm hosting today. My name is Paddy Boylan, and joining me are my friends and colleagues, Alex Eldridge.
Hi, my name is Alex. I am a writer. I have contributed a story to the New Mythic, which we just released, and also, several other publications, literary and non, over the years. And I also teach guitar.
James Healy.
Hello, I'm James. I'm a writer of horror and science fiction, and also an editor.
And Ali Burnham.
Hello, I am a deep breath award-winning screenwriter, and I also write in prose, contributed to the New Mythic. I've done some Quill and Reed, Tales from Netherun, fantasy short stories, short films, comics, and script editing.
Very good. And I'm Paddy Boylan. I am a... What do I do?
Who am I?
I'm Paddy Boylan. I am an editor, technical writer, creative writing teacher, and sometime creative writer. And
I have those existential questions just sneak up on you.
They have a way of doing that. And fun fact, ladies and gentlemen, we are in the process of sorting our second anthology at the moment. So if you've been following us for a while, we wrote an anthology, a fantastic one, called The New Mythic a little while ago, and we're gearing up for volume 2. And that's been interesting.
We've been seeing so much of each other lately, all on the Square Zooms.
We have.
Square Zooms, yeah.
It's been very pseudo-social.
Yeah. The digital Brady Bunch.
So guys and gal, what have we been up to lately in the world of literature?
I just picked up... Oh, yeah, no, you got your first.
Arm wrestle for it. I was going to jump in because I've been madly obsessed with a new show that I've been preaching to whenever I get the opportunity. And it's occurred to me I haven't actually been on a podcast since I've become obsessed with this thing. Paddy and Alex have already heard this rant. So I'll just pretend I'm ranting just for James. So there's an animated show on Prime called Hazbin Hotel. It is currently my life. A bit of backstory to this show. The creator of it released a pilot on YouTube about 4 years ago, this 20-minute animation. It went insanely viral because it just had a very unique animation style. Watching it is like putting your eyes in a blender in a good way. And it has music. It's musical as well, and the music's phenomenal. So it was just loud. It was crazy. Went crazy viral, and everyone's like, "Where's the full TV show?" 4 years later, likely because of a lot of blood, sweat, and tears behind the scenes, the show is now up 8 episodes on Hazbin Hotel, and there will be more seasons, which is really exciting. Essentially, the quick pitch for it is typical Disney princess is the princess of hell. It's an R-rated show. It's not for kids. There's a lot of drugs, sex, and violence in it, but the princess of hell essentially wants to save all her people and redeem all the sinners, and shenanigans follow. Basically, I just want to pitch it because the voice acting and music is phenomenal if you love that. The art style's amazing, and just the characters designs are really unique. I feel like a space that is quite heavily mined, like creating a new Lucifer. Imagine sitting down and being like the full landscape of every awesome interpretation of Lucifer in all our media. How do you create something that feels unique in this space? I think this
Beloved
shows-
character Lucifer.
Yeah. No, this time and time again, there's
Yeah.
many excellent
Yeah.
Lucifers.
He's
out
always
there.
great.
Yes. And this show's managed to come up with another take on him again that is quite excellent and is probably my favorite character. So check it out if you love musicals, if you love animation. And even if you don't, it's only 8 episodes and it's rip-roaring fun.
Or if you love Lucifer.
Or if you love Lucifer, you're going to love him again.
It was kind of like a Neo Cartoon Network animation style from memory.
Yes, so it's got hints to classical Disney, like there's Steamboat Willie, that black and white bobble animation, I almost want to call it, is getting kind of perverted and changed, and
It's kind of Cuphead-like vibes.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Excellent.
I've
And how
also
do you-
got my mug before we move on. That's my Alistair mug. I'm already buying merchandise from the show.
How do you spell Hazbin, just for anyone that's looking it up?
Hazbin, Hazbin Hotel.
Oh, there we go.
Okay.
Check out Hazbin Hotel. What about y'all, the male half of the room?
Because my feminine energy takes up 50%.
No, for some reason I counted myself in the feminine half. Just
Yeah.
what
He's just here
happens when you
balancing it
record
out.
at 7 a.m.
I've just picked up a copy of House of Leaves in a very
great.
House of Leaves-esque
Yeah.
kind of way.
All right.
I was
Nice.
helping a friend clear out a storage unit, or just take a few things out of a storage unit. And inside in the storage unit was a bookshelf. I was kind of skimming through it, being like, "Oh, I might borrow a book or whatever." And right there was House of Leaves, so I pulled it out, and I remember the two of you talking about it, and thought, "Oh,
Yeah.
I'll check that out."
That's a very
and I
House of
can't
Leaves
get
way to
back
find
to it.
that.
It is.
Absolutely, that's what I was thinking. Yeah, it was fun. It was fun. Yeah, so I'm checking it out. I don't know if I like it yet or not. I'm about 75 pages in. I'm going to give it 100 pages because it's very interesting, just in how it's structured, in the different layers of storytelling that's going on. It was well worth checking out, but I'm not sure if it has me hooked. And it's a very long book, so I don't know if I'm going to commit to it just yet.
I mean, I finished
But I
the thing
think
and
it-
I'm still not sure if I liked it, but I'm glad I read it because, like you said, there's nothing quite like it. And if nothing else, it gives you a lot of ideas for what can be done with structure and with the
Absolutely,
even
yeah.
formatting, with what can be done with formatting, which sounds weird.
Yeah, it's almost something that like every writer should check out at least the first 100 pages, just to see how someone can kind of break up the rules a little bit and see what that can be done.
But it gets almost more interest. I mean, it does go on a long time, but there's things that happen as it goes on that really start to push the whole formatting thing. So even if like toward the end, to be honest, I was skipping pages. Like I was skim reading and
a lot of Johnny Truant's stuff.
Yeah, you don't need
But
the
then
Johnny
some of
Truant
that-
stuff. You don't need that.
You probably don't,
Yeah.
honestly.
Because
It's no
there's an interesting thing happening there. I don't know if it's interesting enough to warrant the word count, but some of that goes into quite good stream of consciousness stuff. But on the other end of that, a lot of it feels like it's someone trying to write. So when that starts to break down and it starts to become like more honest expressions, I was like, "Oh, that's really cool." But I don't know if that warranted. Like I did skip pages and pages of his stuff. So.
Alex and I have been talking about doing House of Leaves episode for a little while, and if you've also read it and recently, I think we should revisit this because it would be a really interesting subject for an episode. There's so much to talk about.
Yeah.
And also the stuff that doesn't quite work.
Yeah.
That'll motivate me to read them.
Yeah. I think it's worth getting through to the end, even if you don't give it your 100% through.
The main story alone is great. It's really incredible. Even if you just read that, I think that's worth your money. My new obsession is kind of parallel to Ali's. It's actually a cartoon, but this is a very old cartoon as opposed to a new one. I've started watching The Venture Brothers, which is really fun. It's an old Adult Swim cartoon, and basically it's still not finished technically. It's like over 17 years, like 7 series, and there's this podcast I listen to, or like a podcast network called Duckfeed TV, and they're basically doing a run through the show, and I'm like, I'll just watch along as I do it, and it's It's really good. It's like, imagine you had a bunch of superheroes and supervillains and stuff, but like the show isn't really about like them doing supervillainy stuff. It's more about the stuff that happens behind the scenes. It's like, oh, like what are you gonna do about this trauma you've got? Like, you know, with like dealing with your dad and like, oh, I've got you tied up like in the Amazon rainforest, and then someone calls time out, and it's like, well, according to the Guild of Columbus Intent rule book, like we have to give you time out, and then we have to meet back. Like it's just very silly stuff, and the characters are actually surprisingly well fleshed out. And I'm only up to the second season, but yeah, given that I only usually watch one season of something at a time, then abandon it for like 5 years, that's pretty good stuff. So yeah, I've been going through that, and I really enjoy it. It's very funny.
It's been on my watch list for a long time now. I really need to get around to it.
Yeah, it's really good.
I'm still going through Bernard Cornwell, who writes the Uhtred series, the Last Kingdom series, which, if anyone's seen the TV series, it's set in Iron Age Britain against the Danes. Oh, I love it. I'm absolutely loving it. I'm halfway through the series now, and I've just read book after book. There's another book that I'm getting a little bit sidelined with called Once Were Wolves, that was recommended to me by a Sydney author, and it's about a woman who is an ecologist who is involved in wolf rewilding in Scotland. So they're trying to reintroduce wolves to the landscape because wolves keep predators down, keep prey down, and prey are bad in large numbers, and it's good for the ecology. And you know something's going to happen. Like I think maybe livestock's going to go missing, and then children are going missing, and people are blaming the wolves as the wolves. It's very good, very tense. Haven't finished it, but I'll come back once it's done. Once Were Wolves, very interesting. So, the hero's journey. I know, because we discussed this just before the episode, that all of you are at least aware of the hero's journey. And I think anyone that's looked into kind of the theory of writing a little bit will be. But does someone want to give kind of an overview of what they understand it to be?
I can talk to you how I first learned about it. It was probably actually late high school. So I studied a lot of extension English and drama. And so it was this theory, this structure. And I'm like, oh, that sounds interesting. I want to know more. I want to know more. But it was basically pitched to me that if you look close enough, nearly all stories can fit over this netting or shape to it. It may not be perfect, but if you just go in and look a little bit closer, you will see the same beats again and again and again. And it was a bit of an aha moment for me as a young writer. Kind of, it's like a peek behind the curtain and you see the formula for the first time. And you're actually like, oh, hang on, there's building blocks to this. And once you can see the building blocks, then you're like, well, then I can become a construction person. And so that was quite exciting for me.
Pretty much. Any of you guys want to take a stab at it, or should we get straight into?
Yeah, I'd just say it's a formula, a pattern that essentially breaks down all the stages that that a character, a protagonist, will go through within the story. And it doesn't always map exactly to it, but if you squint a little bit at some of the points, you can definitely be like, that's essentially what it is. It's a map that, while it may not be perfect every time, will vaguely, track to pretty much any story.
Pretty much.
Yeah, I'd pretty much say the same. It can be very useful as a writer in planning out something, planning out a first draft, or in coming back and trying to edit something to slightly fit this pattern a little bit better. You'll notice it starts to get better once it fits into this. I've even noticed it very effectively used in set pieces or action sequences for structuring out how an action scene can play out. I've noticed that used very well.
That's interesting. Let's circle back to that later, because I actually wasn't aware of that. That's very cool. So you can use it on like the micro scale as well as
like
the
a
macro.
mini cycle of it.
You can put it in a chapter. You can put it in an extended scene or a conflict. Yeah, I've seen it used that way.
Yeah, let's put a pin in that and come back to it.
Yeah.
So the hero's journey. The idea was first put forward by someone called Joseph Campbell in 1949. And Joseph Campbell was an American writer and literature professor. But particularly pertinent, he worked in the fields of comparative religion and comparative mythology. So looking at different myths and religions and their myth cycles and how they kind of relate to each other. And I find this so cool. He believed that he saw I'm going to call it a code because it does feel like that. And it does sound very Dan Brown when you call it a code. And that's fun. A code that exists in, at least according to him, nearly all of the great myths and hero myths of all these different cultures from around the world, from different places, times, cultures, etc., etc. Cultures that have nothing to do with each other seem to have this recurring set of story beats. And it essentially revolves around a hero leaving the ordinary world, the world they come from, going into the world of the unknown, often supernatural, having a metaphoric death and rebirth, encountering a goddess figure, encountering a male father god figure. Other things happen that I won't elucidate on now because it gets a little metaphysical, and then eventually returning to his home people, bringing some sort of wisdom, or he uses the term elixir, like magic potion, which I think is a stand-in for any sort of like knowledge or gift. But the point is, returns home, brings it back, everyone's happy, story over. Really, really cool. The idea was criticized a little bit by later academics saying like, well, you kind of picked and chose what you were looking at, and well, the things exactly map on. But by and large, I think it's pretty much survived the test of time. Like, even if every myth doesn't exactly map onto this, a lot of them do. But more useful for us, even in the 20th and 21st century, we're still writing stories that more or less abide by this structure. So the theory goes that if we learn and understand the hero's journey, and if we choose to use it in our own writing, we ourselves can tap into this almost Jungian archetypal story that has existed since the dawn of time, which, I mean, as well as being used by Hollywood greats like George Lucas and God, who's the guy? Oh, George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. Editor, please fix
Cameron.
that.
No, I leave it as George Lucas and George Lucas.
George Lucas.
He does use it. What was I saying?
George Lucas.
You're just kind of.
As
You've just been saying George Lucas on a loop for a few minutes.
I'm so sorry. Well, it's being used by George Lucas and Steven Spielberg.
I love what you're saying, Paddy, about there's kind
George
of this
Lucas.
chicken and the egg question for the hero's journey for me, where it's clearly audiences resonate with this structure, with this code again and again. And I ask myself, is it because we're just so familiar with it? It's something we were raised on in our very first stories. These are the Greek mythologies. It's just embedded so deeply in our social culture that when we hear this story again, we go, familiar, home. Like, is that what the resonance is? Or is it there's something that's a bit more metaphysical that I think you're going to get into, Paddy, that we can't explain, that even if a person had never heard, or they existed in a vacuum and were never exposed to this structure, they would still resonate with it. There's still a power, a logic to it that our human monkey brains just really like.
I am not going to get into it that deeply because, look, as we discussed a little bit before the episode, Campbell describes, it's called the monomyth as well, which is such a rad word, the monomyth. He describes his monomyth in 17 stages, and they get Baroque. So there's stages with names like the meeting with the goddess, woman as temptress, and atonement with the father. And he talks about ideas of going into the great womb of the earth and having a spiritual rebirth, and it's a little highfalutin in its original form. Fortunately, in I want to say the 1970s, I might not have that exactly right, but I want to say the 1970s, a Hollywood screenwriter and producer called Christopher Vogler actually did a rewrite of the monomyth and reduced it to 13 stages. And look, it seems like it still produces the same stories. It's essentially the same formula, but it's more streamlined for 20th century and 21st century film writing and screenwriting and stuff like that. And that's what I want to focus on because I think it's the more practical of the two. Listeners, if you'd be interested in a deep dive into the metaphysical world of the original 17-stage monomyth, let us know. That could be fun as well. But today we're going to focus on this 13-stage streamlined structure, which honestly is just a bit more practical for writers in the modern everyday world. And I think this is the structure that you guys would be familiar with, the 13 one as opposed to the 17 one. Is that correct?
Definitely, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I think so. And even as we're going to go through it, what I'm really familiar with is another bastardized version again, which is only 8 beats. So it is fascinating that this seems to be this really clear drive of shorten, tighten, that's just happening with our storytelling over the past 200 years.
What does it say about us? Maybe
Yeah.
nothing. Maybe nothing.
And
In
our attention
50
spans.
In 50 years, it'll just be like, there's a
3.
journey.
Yeah.
Like, there'll just be the one point.
Also, look, correction, I've been saying 13 stages. It's actually 12 stages. 12
Shorter again.
stages. Shorter again. There we go. We're refining it even in the space of 10 minutes. Let's crack on. So I want you to imagine as I'm going through these 12 stages as like facings on a clock. So we start at 1 o'clock, 3 o'clock is 90 degrees eastward, 6 o'clock is at the bottom, 9 o'clock is at the leftward, and 12 o'clock is at the top of the clock northward. And that's important because, like many journey stories, it's a circular tale. We end back where we begin. So the hero leaves the ordinary world, they have a journey, and then they return back in the ordinary world. Okay, here we go. Number 1, unsurprisingly, is called the ordinary world. So this is the status quo, right? So many stories start with the status quo. We establish the who, what, when, where, why. We establish the world as it is, and this is where we begin. So the hero starts in their village, or they start in Hobbiton, or they start in their everyday desk job that they hate. Importantly, though, there's usually something wrong. So maybe the hero isn't totally content with where they are. Maybe they dream of bigger things, or maybe they're unhappy with their station, or maybe the priests from the mountain come down every year and take the firstborn sons up the mountain and they're never seen again. Like something's a little bit amiss. And I think that's important because it sort of promises that we're not going to stay in this world forever. Like if Harry Potter was happy with his
Being under the
stepfamily,
stairs.
yeah, then I mean, there's no impetus for adventure. So Harry Potter's got to be he's got to be unhappy, right? In order to be promised that, like, no, we're going somewhere with this. So you guys would be familiar with this, right? Like this isn't just hero's journey. This happens basically all storytelling.
I usually talk about it as a lack is just my go-to word for it. But
That's good.
even if things appear fine. So Lord of the Rings is a great example. Hobbiton's pretty ideal, but we get a bit closer in on Frodo, and there is a lack. He expresses a wanting for the wider world, some kind of adventure. He's not truly satisfied with self and his ordinary world.
Exactly. Now, accompanying us on this hero's journey, I'm going to use the Matrix. And I'm going to take us through stages in the Matrix to map onto all these 12, because it seems like the Matrix, I'd be very surprised if it wasn't written with the 12-point hero's journey in mind. It maps on so perfectly. So the status quo in the Matrix, Neo works a day job, a regular corporate job as a hacker. And sorry, not as a hacker. He works a regular day job in an office, and he hates it, and he's very unhappy. And he moonlights at night as a computer hacker. Okay, stage 2. We're now at 2 o'clock. Anyone want to guess what this is?
Is it a inciting incident? Oh no, am I jumping ahead?
No.
No.
Okay, so the call to adventure?
You betcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, you betcha. It's a call to adventure, i.e. the call to action. And again, this is a term that's used outside of the hero's journey as well. Something happens that promises the chance of adventure. There's
And then
a problem.
the Fire Nation attacks.
And then the Fire Nation attacks. Yeah, exactly. There's a problem that needs to be solved, or a desire somebody has, or a catastrophe that's looming. And it turns out that the hero is the one that has to solve it. How does the hero solve it? It involves leaving the ordinary world and going into the world of the unknown, the mysterious, often supernatural world that exists outside of the status quo. Now, importantly, he hasn't left yet. There's just the call. There's just the thing that happens. So in the Matrix, Neo sees the mysterious text on his computer screen, right, telling him to follow the White Rabbit. Right. Stage 3, the refusal of the call. In the Matrix, Neo doesn't want to follow the White Rabbit at first. He kind of panics, if you guys remember this. He's like, whoa, what? And he hits the escape key again and again, and he's weirded out.
That was a pretty good Keanu Reeves, honestly.
Yeah.
Thank you. Whoa. He hits the escape key again and again because he's, afraid that someone's hacked his computer, etc. And this is important because initially the hero refuses the call. Maybe they feel like they're duty bound to stay in their village and look after their family. Maybe they're afraid. Maybe like in The Hobbit, they hate the idea of adventure, or maybe they feel inadequate. Like sometimes at this stage, the hero is a hero, but sometimes they're a regular person. And if they're a regular person, they think like, well, I can't do this. I'm just me.
I do love the refusal of the call. It's something I've observed. This is one of the beats that gets dropped in modern media more and more. It's if a story's going to plow ahead, it's refusal that gets dropped. So thinking of Star Wars and Harry Potter, Luke's like, get me off this fucking planet. He gets on that ship as fast as he can. Same with Harry. Once Harry gets his letter, the refusal comes in the sense the Dursleys try to hide him away, but Harry himself is like, I'm a what? And then he's ready to go. There's no refusal at all. So I am fascinated by media that is now taking a breath and kind of, if they want to shake up the formula at the moment, it's spending more time on the refusal.
Could we maybe reinterpret refusal of the call as barrier to entry? Like there's something stopping them from entering that? Because this refusal of the call, I look at it and I actually struggle a little bit to think of specific. Like in Star Wars, I think Luke's like, oh no, but I got stuff to do here. I can't, and then Obi-Wan, then he comes back and the aunt and uncle are dead. But I think if we think of it more as like, hey, there's a barrier here stopping them. So your example, the Dursleys, is actually a really good idea. A really good example of that, where it's like, hey, there's this little stopping point here. Like otherwise, Hagrid would just be like, hey, come on, we're gonna go. But he actually has to come in and mess them up a bit. And,
I guess it's splitting hairs between, is it an internal refusal or is it an external refusal?
Exactly.
So the if it's an outside force stopping them, I would see that as like the external plot's getting in the way. But I guess I'm fascinated by the if it is an internal stopper. I feel like we see less of that. So when I do see it, so when the Andor TV show I talked about previously,
and you said it was very good.
I love it because it wants to spend a lot of, I feel like a less sophisticated story would have been like, oh no, my town's being treated poorly, I'm a rebel now. It really spends a lot of time on asking, what does it take for someone to actually become a radicalized, person against the Empire? So that there's a lot of refusal.
Yeah, sure.
I often think of the refusal not necessarily as the explicit, like, oh, I'm not going to do this. I tend to think of it as a period of time in between the character being aware that there's something they're supposed to do and then being pushed into doing it. There's I have seen it put together very quickly in that they're given the job and then they're like, no, and then right away something happens, they have to go and do it. But in a lot of stories I also see they kind of know that's there, but they're sort of almost procrastinating, or there's some reason for them to put it off, and it may not come across, may not be like as highlighted as a specific refusal, but it's just a period of time before they get thrown into the story.
I mean, in the Matrix, the distance between the refusal and accepting is so small. Like it goes from, oh no, hitting the escape key to, well, we'll get to the thing that makes him follow in the space of about 5 minutes. But,
I might just in the terms of, because when you were saying, I think of it as two separate. I think of the next stage, the mentor, as being when he gets visited by the agents.
We'll see.
We'll see. Okay.
We'll get to that when we get to the next stage.
Yeah. No, I'm jumping ahead. Okay.
So Neo initially refuses the call, but it's only when he spots the tattoo of the White Rabbit on someone's shoulder who's about to go to a nightclub that he sees it, realizes that there's a meaning in what the text on the computer said, which was follow the White Rabbit, decides to go to the club with them, and then accepts the beginning of the adventure, which leads us to stage 4. You called it, James, the meeting with the mentor. So the mentor is usually an older, wiser figure, and someone who first reassures the hero and gives them the confidence they need to fully accept the adventure. So before they were refusing, they were reluctant, but the mentor often says, like, no, you can do this. I got you. And they give them something. So it could be a physical item, like, say, a lightsaber. It could be a confidence, right? You are the chosen one, and I believe in you. It could be secret knowledge, like the villain who attacked our village is also the one who killed your father, and now you're obliged to avenge them. I've also seen sometimes the mentor isn't even a person, it's just simply information that the character finds. Maybe they find an old tome or something that gives them info that begins. But the point is something typically more experienced and wiser, and that has often come from the supernatural world themselves. Maybe the mentor has been and seen what lurks in the realm beyond the mountains, that comes and instructs our hero. I mean, Obi-Wan Kenobi used to fight the Empire as a Jedi, right? And Gandalf has been all around the world and knows the face of evil really well, both of which are wizards, interestingly enough.
So is Hagrid.
So is Hagrid. Beards are common. Do you guys have any other examples of mentor scenes from literature or... I mean, there's 1,000, like it's such a trope at this point, but we never seem to get sick of seeing it, apparently.
I often think of the mentor as, you can think of it as a person, but I often think of it as a moment as well. There's something that happens to the character that maybe kind of shakes up their perception of things. In Titanic, for example, I think the point where Jack takes Rose down into the steerage and they go to the party and they're kind of dancing, I take that as a little bit of a mentor moment for Rose and her conflict between kind of what she's, between the life she has now and like other possibilities of lives that she could have. And I think that kind of cements her engagement with Jack a little bit more.
So Jack appears in the story before the mentor moment, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I think Jack is like the call. Yeah. And she's initially like, oh, we're from kind of different classes and stuff, and she's not entirely on board. I think, not pun intended, I think he gets invited then to a party, not by her, but by someone else. So I think that Rose is still in a period of maybe not really knowing what to make of Jack. And then he invites her to a party. And, she kind of like gets to let loose and gets to kind of like see a different side of life. And
yeah, I would
it's
agree.
A lot less stuffy. It's a lot less rigid than the kind of thing she's used to.
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason strictly why the mentor has to be introduced to the story at this point. We could already... I mean, does Gandalf appear in the Lord of the Rings earlier than the meeting with the mentor stage? I feel like he does. Don't know. It's been too long.
Well, hang on. What about when he like Bilbo gives him the ring and then he's like, no, I can't take it. Is that? I mean, I guess that's the refusal. Look, like, when does he like say, hey, Frodo?
Doesn't Aragorn appear at the point when the magic is really starting to kick into that story?
I'd still call it Gandalf.
Yeah.
I think we do get Gandalf in the flashes you're talking about, Alex. It's Bilbo's just quick prologue where I distinctly know the scene where Gandalf's in a library and he slams a book shut. So we kind of, it's all the research he's been doing into the ring, but his real introduction is him arriving in the Shire. He's on the cart with Frodo, and is there to fuck up Frodo's life. It would be the true mentor moment.
Yeah. Do these things have to necessarily be in order like that? I mean, I guess they do. Like, I guess that's kind of the point.
The theory is that they do. And sometimes I think not every work maps perfectly. And sometimes you do have to wiggle them around a little bit. Often they do. But I mean, when I see these things online, like when people look at Star Wars, they'll say like, ooh, stage 6 is this. No, stage 6 is this.
Yeah.
It's not an exact science. There are certainly works like The Matrix, where I think you can map it one-to-one without too much difficulty, but sometimes you do need to wiggle a little bit to slot it into place.
So in The Matrix, what's the guy's name? I was going to say Orpheus, but it's not Orpheus.
Morpheus.
Morpheus. Is the mentor figure.
100%. It's Morpheus. The mentor is Morpheus.
Okay, all right.
No, I don't think so. I think it's absolutely Morpheus. And
oh my god, it's too early. Fuck.
Whatever. He's a professional. Every website I saw agreed with this. And yeah, Morpheus is the archetypal mentor. He's wise. He comes from afar. He's got knowledge. He doesn't blink. Yeah, it's
Well,
totally
he's got
Morpheus.
glasses. He doesn't need to blink.
He'll be blinking all the time under those, I suppose.
Yeah, he's just doing this constantly.
Which leads us to stage 5, crossing the first threshold. So the hero's been reassured, or they've been given the magic sword, or whatever it is they need, and now they take their first step into the world of the unknown, away from the world of the ordinary. And in the Matrix, it is, if you take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe what you want to believe. If you take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Ooh, such a good speech. Now, importantly, often at the crossing of the first threshold, there is a guardian. Now, whether it's an actual being who's a guardian or whether it's a test, there is something that needs to be overcome or passed. Sometimes there's a riddle or something. There's some kind of initial hurdle, and it's almost like the hero needs to prove to destiny that they are capable of doing this, right? This is the thing that stops any old person from just swanning on into the world of the unknown. If the hero doesn't surpass this, then they're not really a hero. And this is sort of like the proving. We know that they're a hero because, well, they took the correct pill. Yeah. This happens again and again in storytelling.
And I love thinking of this moment as a point of no return or a lock-in. So
yes.
You establish this moment as they can't go back over the threshold. For whatever reason, that door shuts behind them. That's kind of the danger and stakes you can feed into this moment of, well, once they've done this, you can't just be like, oh, this is too hard, and your character goes back and sits on the sofa. It's like, if they've left, if they've crossed that threshold, they're in this new world for better or for worse.
Yeah, very explicitly in the form of the Matrix, for sure. Like, you cannot unknow, the Matrix, right?
You can't untake the pill. Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
And again, Lord of the Rings is a softer version of this. This is the furthest I will have ever been from home. One more step and
oh yeah, that probably is it actually, which is very, I mean, they say it very explicitly in that, right?
Yep.
I'm crossing the threshold.
Mr. Frodo, take my hand as we cross the threshold together.
So now we've taken our first step into the world of the unknown, and it's time for stage 6. So we're at the 6 o'clock position on the clock. And this one is called Tests, Allies, and Enemies. Now we've entered the special world, and we get to find out what's special about it. So the special or unknown world is a place of magic and mystery and danger. And often this is where the hero is put through their initial trials. They experience the first sense of danger or difficulty that basically promises the things to come. Maybe if it's an action film, they get their first attacks. Maybe if it's a romance, they have their first romantic issues, or the person who's the third in the relationship causes the first conflict. Something like that. We see how potentially dangerous the world can be. And we also start to see the characters who are going to aid the hero, because rarely in tales, modern or mythic, is the hero doing this alone. There's often sidekicks, helpers, part of their entourage. We start to meet these characters, so we're getting a sense for the enemies and the allies that exist in this different world. In the Matrix, well, anyone want to guess what this is in the Matrix? Does anyone remember the Matrix?
Yeah, it's like the crew. There's like Cypher.
Yeah.
And, all the. I only ever remember Cypher because he's the most interesting one. But yeah,
Cypher was a great character. The others,
and at some point, Trinity is there, I'm sure.
Yeah. Oh, she turns up first. She's where he's.
Well, yes,
White Rabbit, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's in the club. Yeah, it's the meet on the Nebuchadnezzar, which is the flying submarine thing that they travel around the real world in the Matrix. Yeah, we get to know the crew.
Yep, and to keep contrasting it with other media, Lord of the Rings then gives us Aragorn. The other two hobbits have followed. The band gets together, and Harry Potter, we're on the train, and
absolutely. We're getting to meet his other
Ron and Hermione.
Yep. Oh, and he's got the oh no, this is before he has the clash with Malfoy. It's just like the the chocolate frogs and things. I think this is about
But that
as
would
far
be
as
an extension of leading
Yeah,
it
true.
into. So we get the allies and then meeting the villains. Draco's there at the steps, and it's very quick. Once we're getting sorted into houses, we
Yeah.
get a shot of all the professors, being Snape, being Quirrell, are all introduced. And Lord of the Rings gives us pretty quickly. It's a very just shady lodging where they meet Aragorn. They have to get out of town pretty
Oh
quick.
yeah, the bar. Yeah.
And then we get the really cool shot where they have to hide on the side of the road from the Nazgul for the first time, is almost the next immediate beat after that.
Well, the next stage after Test Allies and Enemies is called Approach to the Innermost Cave. It's sometimes hard to know where one ends and one begins. They do blur into each other a little bit, but Approach to the Innermost Cave is sometimes where we start to see, like the Nazgul thing, that could be this stage. This is sometimes called the Approach, and it's called Approach to the Innermost Cave because a lot of these stories can be seen as almost like a descent down into the world. They go from the surface deeper, deeper, deeper. They go to the very bottom point of the lowest nadir, and then they come back up to the surface with some kind of treasure. And as we're approaching the innermost cave, there's a period of traveling there. So often in films and books, there actually is a period of travel where the characters are riding on horseback. And this is like Test Allies and Enemies, but it tends to be a bit more intimate. And sometimes the hero will learn things about themselves. So a character might question their intentions, or they might question, are you really up to this task? It's sort of like a series of psychological tests almost. Also in this, there's sometimes some suspicion of the characters around them. So characters that seem good might, for the first time, we have a little bit of doubt about them. Characters who are bad, maybe we start to see a little bit of like, well, maybe there's some good in them. It's a period of kind of everyone glancing around and looking at each other and trying to suss each other out somewhat. And often this does happen in a period of travel. So in Star Wars, I would say this is when they're in the Millennium Falcon and Han Solo questions that the Force exists at all. While at the same time, Obi-Wan says, oh, but take your blast shield down on your face. You don't need to see anymore. In The Matrix, this is when Neo goes to see the Oracle. So he's traveling to see her, and she tells him more about the world, about himself, although she says he's not the one. So spoilers, she's actually deceiving him a little bit, or she doesn't know. And he's told that eventually he'll have to make a choice whether to sacrifice himself to save Morpheus. So again, this is a time in the story where we're learning things at a more intimate level. We're unraveling the pieces a little bit. The mystery starts to deepen. Okay. Stage 8. So 8 o'clock on the clock. This is called the ordeal. And sometimes this is also called the innermost cave. So this is where the hero enters that deep cave, travels to the nadir, the deepest point of the supernatural world, and where they face their greatest challenge, at least to date. And in some sense, they reach their deepest, darkest point. Now, the ordeal is often composed into 2 beats. First is death. The character experiences some sort of metaphorical death. Often this is like the actual death of someone close to them. Sometimes this is a death of part of themselves. Sometimes it's a loss of something or someone dear to them. And then there is a rebirth. So it's almost like the death is the price that has to be paid, but the rebirth is the reward that they get. In The Matrix, Neo and the gang are attacked by agents and SWAT team members, and Morpheus is captured. Neo is then faced with that choice of, do you sacrifice yourself to save Morpheus? And I would argue that the death here is Neo accepting his own death. He's like, well, to save Morpheus, I need to die, essentially. By accepting his death, that fulfills the death half of this scene. You guys, are there any other examples you can think of from literature that do this? I've got a few, but I want to see if anything comes to mind for you all.
So you said this is 8 o'clock.
This is
on
8
the
o'clock.
on the
Yes.
dial.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
the way
I
through
feel like this is
theoretically.
another one of the beats where modern media crunches where this one takes place a little bit. Sometimes this beat can be a lot closer to Act 3.
I've got one. Sorry, no, go on. That's associating.
Because I'm just thinking, what's Harry's kind of lowest of the low before he has to climb back out? And I actually think we've now fast forwarded to we're actually doing the tests and trials on the way to the Philosopher's Stone. It's when Ron is not you. Oh no, sorry, not me, not Hermione, you. I think it's
Mhm.
that moment. And
That's
then he
exactly
gets,
what I have. Yep. And
Right.
he dies, he sacrifices himself,
yeah,
right?
yeah. So he gets offed on the horse, and then similar in the books, it's Hermione has to stay behind at a different test, and then Harry's got to go forward on.
I think
So-
I think stage 8 could take place in the third act. I actually don't know where these map onto in the traditional 3-act structure, but we're pretty far
Yeah.
through the story at this
I
point.
mean-
Like we're past 6 o'clock.
The
But
one
Lord
I
of the Rings, it's a little bit earlier, so this would be Gandalf, right?
Yeah.
Or
No,
Run, you
Gandalf-
fools!
Yeah, Gandalf falling for sure.
because there's a few different losses that have to take place, because then we've got what's his name betraying the fellowship in the forest and takes all the arrows.
Yeah.
Boromir.
Yeah.
Boromir. I'm like, someone jump in with his name, Boromir.
It's probably worth saying, and I probably should have mentioned before, I don't think 6 o'clock exactly does map onto 50% through the
It's
movie.
not quite a
No.
midpoint.
Yeah, when you
Probably
see
54.
charts, I mean, I described it as an exact clock, but often I think 6 is more in like the 4 o'clock position, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah, I think
Should have
so
looked this up
too.
before the podcast,
Yeah,
but
no, but
no,
in
6
terms
o'clock is
of-
not exactly 50%.
Yeah, no, I think the if you're thinking of it as a movie and where the midpoint is, the tests and trials take up the bulk of your movie. It is your act 2.
Yeah.
And then now we're definitely, if not in Act 3, these are the big turning points that put us in Act 3.
Yeah, the approach to the cave tends to be after the midpoint, usually, right? That's when, certainly in Lord of the Rings, they've had that period of traveling. They try to go over the mountains and then they decide they have to literally go under the mountain. And that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
when they get
Literally
into the cave.
a cave.
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
it is. It often is. They go into the Death Star, deeper underground in
Yep.
that. Obi-Wan
Yep.
dies, right?
Yeah.
Alex,
very
you were going to say
silly
something?
example. The very, very silly example that I thought of is Disney's Hercules, if anyone remembers that, because that
course.
is literally
Absolutely.
literally the monomyth. When he fights the Hydra, I think, and like everything's coming apart, and he chops the heads off, and they come back. He's like, "No, there's nothing they can do." And then, I don't know. I think he like punches the wall, and like he's like, "Well, if I have to go out, I'll do it like this. I'll save everyone." So he does that, sacrifices himself, sort of, but that turns out to them. Maybe I'm misremembering that.
Counter
think
example.
that-
I would pitch that as a midpoint triumph. I think his lowest of the low is the deal with Hades to give up his power.
But then that's the
Yeah.
resurrection. That's, I guess.
But he's got to earn it. He
yeah,
spends a
that's
bit
the
of
road
time
back, I
depowered.
guess.
There's
Yeah. Okay. So that would be then the test set. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. The last 3 are kind of like coda-ish, I suppose.
yeah. We're in Endgame.
We are
Yeah,
in
true
Endgame.
enough, true
We're
enough.
at stage 9, the reward. So the rebirth has happened, and now the hero gets to fully, and I say hero, it can obviously be a heroine as well, right? Probably should have prefaced this at the beginning. Hero we're using in the gender neutral sense, like actor. The heroes survived the ordeal, and maybe they take time to reflect on the death and rebirth and compose themselves. Maybe they gain new abilities as a result. Maybe they gain new confidence, or they realize that I can do this. I've been through the worst of the worst. I've survived the ordeal. Now I'm a hero. Often they get a magic sword. I think sometimes this scene can even be called, or I have seen it called, and by scene I mean stage, seizing the sword.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, so you've heard this, Ali, because the magic sword is such a good metaphor for, gaining your power or confidence or whatever it is. Maybe they just learned something crucial to the journey that will help them continue. Maybe they learn the identity of the killer at this point. And they often start to experiment with this new identity. So for the first time, they embody a transformation in themselves. Maybe they start to act as the team's leader for the first time. Or maybe they shed some childish preconceptions that they have and start to become more an adult in a coming of age story. In The Matrix, this is where Neo and Trinity rescue Morpheus, and the three of them need to escape back to the real world. So literally, Morpheus is the reward. And I believe this is also where Neo for the first time does the Matrix dodge, right? Where he does the bullet time dodge thing. He's never been able to do this before, and this is the first inkling we get of him gaining his powers. And that was a reward for risking his life in the metaphoric death of the ordeal. Okay. Stage 10.
I think
Oh, yep.
just between the bullet dodge, I think you're mixing up when he stops the bullets.
No, there's the bullet dodge as well. There's an earlier one where he's first. The stopping the bullets does come later, but there's another
wouldn't that
scene
be
where
the death and rebirth?
no, that is another thing that happens later, which
Sorry,
confusingly
sorry.
has a similar name. No, that's fine.
Okay.
But yeah, this is it's like that's the big gaining of powers, but there's a little gaining of powers that happens before it.
Like an inkling.
Yeah, the inkling. We can call this the inkling.
The inkling.
Stage 10, 10 o'clock, the road back. I've also seen this called The Chase, and I wouldn't be surprised if you've seen it called The Chase as well. Now that the hero has survived the ordeal and they've gained their new powers, there's like a redoubling of effort and a refocusing on finish the adventure. And often this is a race against the time. So they need to get back to the castle before the enemies can. Maybe there's a chase sequence, right? Why it's often called The Chase. But the point is the tension really ramps up here as we rocket along toward the end of the journey. There's often, it's high pace, it's high tension, it's high velocity. Everything is happening. It's usually the most exciting part of the film as well. In The Matrix, the characters are rushing to escape the Matrix to get out, but they're intercepted by agents. And meanwhile, the Nebuchadnezzar is attacked by robots on the outside, and everything's going wrong, and Cypher betrays them. And this is a very fast-paced part of the film.
And so The Chase is actually not that familiar to me because I think this is, again, in a modern plotting of a film, this is the beat that'll get dropped. And I think it's a good example that James was confused because I think these are the two climaxes that would get conflated in modern media, in that once we've had the lowest of the low, we have one big climb and a victory, I think is the more modern. When we're not used to this, the two-step of a hint of power and then fully coming into the power is the original. Well, I think modern media doesn't have the patience for that earning anymore.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. Because I think I was going through examples of this that I know, and Star Wars has got the big space battle. They need to destroy the Death Star before time runs out, and it shoots its enormous laser. The Fellowship in Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship resume their quest. They learn that Saruman has sent his Orokai, and there's a pursuit with the Orokai. Not that that's an old film necessarily. But yeah, I can see it being dropped in more.
I would picture the difference between 90s, early 2000s and modern Marvel. I think that's the era we've seen this beat be forgotten a little bit.
Interesting.
Okay. After The Chase, we have 11, The Resurrection. This is the culmination of everything. This is the big climax, and this is the point where the tension and stakes are as high as they're ever going to get. Usually, the bad guys nearly win, or catastrophe nearly happens. It's the photo finish, right? Often the hero will be reduced to their lowest point. They're nearly dead. In The Matrix, Neo dies and Trinity says, "But you can't die. I was in love with you and you're the one." And the power of her love or something resurrects Neo. And it's a little confusing because there's a death and rebirth stage and also a resurrection stage. But hey, I mean, this is just how it is. You can think about that as like the mini death and rebirth, and this is the big one, I suppose. But the point is the resurrection is the final hurrah. And this is where the hero uses everything they've gained, everything they've learned. If they have a magic sword, like now is the time they use it, and they surge toward triumph and overcome the villains. And Neo defeats Agent Smith. He defeats Agent Smith. He surges with the power of love, and he beats the evil AI once and for all. I mean, this is this happens in every film or book, right? There's always like a final point of overcoming, even if it's like an office drama and the boss confronts and the hero confronts their awful boss for the last time and says, "No, you do the Excel spreadsheet," something like that.
And it's worth pointing out that for people who are like, but what about the movies that have bad endings? They exist as the intentional subversion of
Yes.
this. So this is correct and exists. The only reason you have a subversion is because of this formula. So it's the 8 reel sequence that I use intentionally maps the subversion at the same time. So say if you have a big victory during the trials and tests in a typical good ending hero's journey, that's the beat you would subvert, and that's actually a loss. And the false ending you described, so the one where it looks like the hero might fail and trip at the end, yeah, I know that is a false ending. In a tragedy, that's a false victory. So it's just the literal subversion of this formula to do the opposite.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like the subversion can't exist without the well-established trope.
Yeah.
And finally, we have 12. The hero returns home, and this is called the return with the elixir. Sometimes just called the return, and I think they drop the elixir part because that's confusing. Why is there an elixir?
Where did the elixir come
Where does
from?
the elixir come from? I believe elixirs or potions or like healing water is something that comes up in a lot of myth. Not sure, haven't read Hero with 1,000 Faces, but the point is the elixir is a stand-in for what the hero is bringing back. So sometimes it's just word that the evil one was destroyed. Sometimes the hero returns with powers that can help their people or their community. Sometimes they return with the magic MacGuffin that's going to cure their daughter, something like that. Interestingly enough, elixir is an Arabic word that more or less means magic potion. And this is where the hero returns home, and this is pretty self-explanatory. They return home changed, transformed, and they can help the ordinary world with what they have gained from the supernatural world. And we've come full circle. We're at 12 o'clock. The circle is complete.
And I love the term of they finish as the master of 2 worlds.
Yes.
So they're setting up, there was the ordinary world, there was the supernatural world. They experienced one, but there was a lack. They weren't fully fulfilled. Only after having gone through the supernatural world, mastering that one, they can return home, the master of 2 worlds, and now the lack is fulfilled.
Yep. In the Matrix, in the final scene, we cut to some time, presumably in the near future. Neo is back in the Matrix, but now we know it's not the Matrix that has power over him. It's him that has power over the Matrix. And he tells his AI overlords, over payphone no less, which is pretty funny, that he's going to save the humans trapped within it. He flies into the sky, cue Rage Against the Machine over the closing credits. The film finishes, everyone cheers. What an ending that was.
Peak 90s.
Yeah.
It really was peak 90s. and that's the hero's journey. That's the 12-point hero's journey. And like we said, there's the 17-point, which could be interesting to explore later. Listeners, if you're interested, maybe let us know if you'd like us to get into that. But now you've got the tools to be able to use the 12-point hero's journey yourself, and you'll be in the company of those cinematic greats that we've mentioned throughout the episode.
Before we sign off, as a quick counter, won't spend too much time on this, but if people wanted to look it up and investigate further, there is such a thing as the heroine's journey, and it was brought about, can I credit the correct person, Maureen Murdoch. And basically it is a reaction to the hero's journey, and because it was kind of created around the time of, second wave feminism, and second wave feminism was all like, well, if you're carving out that male identity, then what's the feminine opposite? I'm bastardizing it a little bit, but if there is this masculine quotation marks energy to the hero's journey that is about going out there, defeating things, like if it's a very forward thrusting kind of energy to it, they're like, well, what's the feminine interpretation of this if you believe in your masculine feminine opposites? So to quickly talk about the different points, and it is worth that this came to my attention around the time of Frozen 2, actually.
Hmm.
Because Frozen 2 came out and it received a lot of criticism because people are like, what is this story structure? Is just a dog's breakfast. It's all over the place. But if you read it, that's because it's not following the hero's journey we're familiar with. It's actually plotted to the heroine's journey.
Okay.
So our natural instinct is this is messy and garbage, but it's intentionally this other structure.
Well, just before we move on, what did you actually think of Frozen 2 before you knew that?
Well, that was my knee-jerk reaction a little bit.
Uh-huh.
And so that's why I wanted to investigate it and be like, well, why have they made these choices? And it's because it's intentionally trying to sit in this different energy
Okay.
and not occupy the same space as the typical masculine journey. So step 1, so how many points are on this dial? Only 10. There's 10 points on this dial. Heroine separates from the feminine. The feminine, quotation marks, is often a mother mental figure or a society prescribed feminine marginalized outsider role. My quick interpretation of that is a female character who recognizes she's being othered in some way or other.
Mulan, I'm just saying.
Yeah. Let's see how you go following this. Identification with the masculine and gathering of allies. The heroine embraces a new way of life. This often involves choosing a path that is different from the heroine's prescribed society role, gearing up to fight an organization, role, or group that is limiting the heroine's life options, and entering some masculine dominant identifying defined space. Again, Mulan, well done.
I'm reading this. I've actually got it next to me. I'm reading it down, and it's like literally point for point.
Yeah. Roads and trials and meeting ogres and dragons. The heroine encounters trials and meets people who try to dissuade the heroine from pursuing her chosen path, or who try to destroy the heroine. So it's she's been othered. So she seeks what is the dominant power. People like, what are you doing? Go back to your role. For experiencing the boon of success, the heroine overcomes the obstacles in their way. This is typically where the hero's journey ends. That's an interesting note, where the hero's journey typically ends. So if a hero has overcome his obstacles, he's done. This is then saying there's more for the heroine to do. Beat 5, heroine awakens to feelings of spiritual oddity/death. The heroine's new way of life, attempting the masculine dominant identity, is too limited. Their success in this new way of life is either temporary, illusory, shallow, or requires a betrayal of self over time. So they've had fun mucking around and trying this other identity on. They've had a few W's, they've had a few wins, but it hasn't fully satisfied the lack that they started with. Initiation and descent to the goddess. The heroine faces a crisis of some sort in which the new ways of life is insufficient and the heroine falls into despair. All of the masculine/dominant group strategies have failed them. So yeah, Mulan is outed in the army and they're going to fucking kill her for being a woman. So yeah, the patriarchy's super failed at that. Heroine urgently yearns to reconnect with the feminine. The heroine wants to, but is unable to return to their initial limited state position. So they want to return to their state of safety that they escaped, but for whatever reason, because of the taboos broken, they can never truly go back to what they left. Heroine heals the mother-daughter split. The heroine reclaims some of their initial values, skills, attributes of those and others like them, but now views these traits from a new perspective. I'm picturing the scene in Mulan again, where her friends come to aid her and they can climb up the poles using the feminine clothing.
Yeah.
And it's, I guess, poignant that she doesn't put the armor on again after this point in the movie.
Yeah. She sticks around as is.
Heroine heals the wounded masculine within, which I think is very important because this stops this being a this versus that, or praising feminine as better than masculine. It's the heroine makes peace with the masculine approach to the world as it applies to them. So I think that's a really important beat. It's not a demonizing of what that part of self is.
It's a joining of yin and yang.
Yeah. Heroine integrates the masculine and feminine in order to face the world future with a new understanding of themselves and the world life. The heroine integrates the masculine and feminine. Again, this is all written in quotation marks. So whatever your interpretation of these words are, qualities and perspectives. This permits the heroine to see through binaries and to interact with a complex world that includes the heroine, but is also larger than their personal lifetime or their geographical/cultural milieu. So yes, Mulan being at peace with her, I don't know, she kind of wears the pants, but she still gets to be who she is at the end.
Yeah.
Her role as advisor to the emperor.
Yeah, and you've got the dad going like, oh, the like, you've got the thing at the beginning where he's like, oh, the most beautiful flower is the one that blooms last, and there's like a callback to that, and it's like, but also, yeah, she's the advisor, so there's these two roles that are like working together, and she gets the boy as well.
She
gets the boy.
I didn't think Mulan felt messy at all. I mean, if Frozen 2 did, then if Mulan follows the heroine's journey, then I think that felt great. At least I didn't detect anything wrong.
I know Mulan much better than Frozen 2, so it is worth probably going back and watching Frozen 2. But I remember at the time that's what it was. That was the critique. They're like, if you were judging the structure of Frozen 2, go and learn the heroine's journey instead. But Mulan is tight. It is a fantastic, well-plotted story.
It's a good movie.
And we don't feel that lack or alienation from it being different. Maybe it is speaking to a separate mono myth. By calling it a separate mono myth, I've destroyed the definition of mono myth.
Myth. And may I say, also has the best Disney song with "Be a Man."
Oh,
controversial.
Yeah,
controversial.
I hum that song to myself sometimes.
It
was a winner. The point is that there's many different variations. I mean, is the 17.1 the true one way? No, not necessarily. Is the 12.1 the true one way? No, not necessarily. You'll see loads of different variations online, and they're all fun to experiment with. Although, if you're ever stuck for a default, or you want to write something in kind of like a classic cinematic or literary way, the 12-point hero's journey that we described today, it's a really good default to work from. And with that, we're going to call it a day. If you've enjoyed today, if it's been helpful to you, please leave us a review. A written review would be fantastic, or even just give us a rating on whatever platform you're listening to. It really helps us out. And if you've got any ideas or feedback, then check out the description just below, and you will find a form to get back to you. We would love to hear what you have to say. James, do you want to take us out with a quote?
Absolutely, yeah. I have one here from Joseph Campbell about the hero's journey. And Joseph says, "The journey of the hero is about the courage to seek the depth, the image of creative rebirth, the eternal cycle of change within us, the uncanny discovery that the seeker is the mystery which the seeker seeks to know."
Ooh, the seeker is the mystery. You are the mystery, listener.
It was inside you all along.
It was inside you all along.
Shoes, you know?
And with that, thanks very much. We've been Prose Cons. We'll see you again next week with more delightful nuggets of writing wisdom. Bye-bye.
All right.
Bye.
You're listening to Pros and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast.